And we're on the top of Daf Pei Dalet on the base, continuing in the Agadita in the name of Rabbi Yochanan Rotza Shis Asa Yasuk B'Bei. As we said, with small animals, you produce milk, and if you have to sell your field to buy the smaller animals, the cattle, the goats, the sheep, the lambs, then that's what you should do, and you'll shear off the wool and make clothing out of it to clothe your family. Omer of Chizda Mai Tichsiv Ashtaros Sonecha. What's the meaning of the pasuk? The flocks of your sheep. Why do you use the word ashtaros to describe your flocks? Shema ashros is baleim. That's how you become wealthy. It doesn't mean wealthy. It means, you support your family with the milk and the the cheese and maybe the if you have extra shearings. V'yomer Rabbi Yochanan, we go weiter in the Agadita. Kasa de charshin velo kasa de poshrin. Water that's lukewarm is considered very, very unhealthy to drink. Either you have natural water or you have boiling water, but the mill stage is out. Don't even touch it. And Rabbi Yochanan says it's worse than drinking a cup that was prepared by sorcerers. Now, if we had the time, we would look up on AI about the bacteria in water that Pasha flourishes, this harmful bacteria when it's lukewarm, when the water is lukewarm. Now, again, this doesn't mean that once you boil the water and then it cools off and it's lukewarm, that you're not allowed to drink that water because sakana. No, no, no. We're talking about water that was never brought to the boiling point. Once it's brought to the boiling point, then all the harmful bacteria is destroyed. Hani bili mateches avlicheres leslan bo. We have to figure it out. The ball is in our court, but he's saying that lukewarm water inside an earthenware kli is fine. It's only if the lukewarm water is in metal. That's where the harmful bacteria kind of circulate through the water. There are certain herbs that you could throw into the water, and they will destroy the harmful bacteria in the lukewarm water. And Rashi refers to the roots of grasses and other spices. It's very interesting, that the Yemenites put these kind of, I don't know if you call them licorice or anyway, a lot of spices they put into the water. Now all the Sfardim do it. And now even the Ashkenazim do it. I thought it was for taste purposes, but maybe it's also for health purposes. And you soak the spices and the leaves and the grasses in the hot water. The Yemenites lived till ripe old age. Aval shadi behu tzivaya leslan ba. Bechilo shadi behu tzivaya nami lo amornin el de lo tzitz. Lo tzotz. Aval tzotz leslan ba. As we said before, if you first boil the water and then it cools off, then it's fine, even though it's lukewarm. B'yamar Rav Yochanan, mi sheiniach lo aviv mos rotzali abdam. If you inherited a great deal of money and you want to figure out how to lose that money, then spend it lavishly. And yilbash kli pishtan yishtamish b'kli zchuchis v'yiskar polim v'al yeshev imohem. So what's so terrible about wearing linen clothing? Is it that they're very expensive? The Gemara clarifies. Yilbosh kli pishtan. What's the problem with linen clothing? Bekisna romisa, Roman linen. We don't like the Roman linen. I don't think the Italians today are the Romans because everybody brings back from Italy, all these wonderful garments. But anyway, linen garments. So these linen garments are number one, costly, and they wear out quickly when they come from Rome. Yishtam sheklis chuches bezugisa chivarta. This is white glass, very expensive glass, white glass. Also brings us back to Italy. V'yiskar Paul in v'al if you don't supervise your workers, that's not a good idea. You don't know when they're smoking and when they're sitting and when they're doing nothing, and they might even be stealing. But how much are you going to lose if you have Polim who are just cutting off cucumbers? Yeah, how many cucumbers are they going to steal from you? But B'Tori, if they're in charge of the oxen or they're drivers of the oxen, they're nuffish p'sayu. If they're not supervised and they steal your plowing ox, or if they drive your ox too hard and then the ox gets skinny and dies, they lead him through forests. And basically, the bottom line is make sure you supervise because there's a great loss here. We're still in the Agadat. Dorish Rav Avira Mishmei Zimno Mishmei Zimno Mishmei De Rav Asi Maidiksiv Tov Ish. So we're talking about the pasuk in Tehillim regarding lending money. Tov Ish Chonenu Malvi Yechalkel Dvara B'Mishpat. How good is a man who is gracious, lends money, conducts his affair with justice. So the last two words here, Yechalkel b'mishpat, is the subject of Rav Avira's drasha. The Olam Yochal Odom v'yishte pochos mimashi yeshlo v'yilbash v'kasa kamosh b'mesh yeshlo v'yechabed ishto bonav yosem mimashi yeshlo shein tluyim v'utolui v'misha omer v'yolam. So what does it mean to conduct your affairs in justice? It means three things. So again, we're not talking about strict justice here because the same pasuk talks about tov ish chonen, etc. He's gracious and malva, etc. He lends money. So what is this? Mechalkel dvarav b'mishpat, his affairs with justice. So we have three different halachas. Number one, he should be careful how much money he spends on eating and drinking. Number two, however, with regard to clothing, he doesn't have to cut down and go below his means, but according to his means. Clothing is very, very important. And the Gemara always talks about mechubadai, that my clothing, my cloak, gives me honor and dignity. And if my clothing doesn't look good, it brings me to a state of busha, of embarrassment. And furthermore, the third ruling is that since your children and your wife are dependent upon you, hem tluyimbo, therefore, he should even spend above his means. Now, again, how much he has to spend above his needs to honor his wife and his children with the finest clothing and jewels for his wife, I don't know what's the ceiling over here. But whatever it is, it's spending beyond his means, and he'll depend upon he with a capital H who said the world should come into being. And I'll read to you a comment here in the name of the Maharsha. The merit of his exerting himself for the sake of his wife and his children who depend upon him, he will be worthy of the bounty of God upon whom he depends. Okay, now we get back to Kisi Adam, and we're finished with the Agarata. Darish Rav Eino Apischa de Beirav Beishkalusa Hashochet Lechola B'Shabbos Chayav Lechasos. Now, this is a pella. I understand that if you have a dangerously ill person, you have to shecht meat to feed him and save his life, and that violates the Shabbos, override the Shabbos. But what about Kisi Adam? I mean, does Kisi Adam save the dangerously ill person? Obviously not. And therefore, this drush of Rav Eina is taken to task. Ishtoma Kalmar. Ishtoma means that don't allow him to project his drasha in front of all the Talmidim because it's mistaken. You know, in those days, they used to have an Amora. The Amora, the person who was giving the shir would sort of whisper into the ears of the Amora. The Amora would belt it out. They didn't have microphones. So therefore, we should remove the speaker from him, speaker meaning that Amora that speaks, because this is impossible. Tisanya, Rabbi Yossi Omer Koi ain't shokten oso biyantif. We don't shecht Koi on Yantif, which is a suffix, whether it's a chaya or a behema. And even if he went ahead and he violated that Isur and he shechted, ein mechasen is domo. And Rabbi Yossi is going to derive this from a Kavachomer. The Gemara is going to go wild over this Kavachomer. It's such a great Kavachomer, it's impeccable. So in order to understand the Kavachomer Rabbi Yossi, in which he wants to prove that in the case of a koi, we don't shecht it on Yontif because we certainly don't want to do Kisi Adam mitzad Safek. And if on Yontif we're going to be machmir to avoid Kisi Adam, how much more so on Shabbos? Again, unless the Kisi Adam is Pikuach Nefesh, but there's no Pikuach Nefesh in the Kisi Adam. And the Kavachomer of Rabbi Yossi is predicated on Mila. Mila on the 8th day overrides the Shabbos because it's Natilas Neshama when you wound a person and remove his blood, which is a tolda of Shochet. Or maybe the Av is Natilas Neshama, whatever it might be. So Mila on the 8th day, the Torah says, Yom HaShmini Yimol B'Sof Afilu B'Shabbos, and it's Vadei Docha Shabbos. Now, what happens if we have a doubt? Let's say the baby was born Ben Hashmoshos, and we don't know exactly which is the 8th day. And that's going to be a suffix. Now, we can't be Docha Shabbos and violate the malacha of Netilas Neshama and Shochet in a case of a suffix. We have to be definite. And not only that, if the 8th day, or I should say the suffix 8th day, because we don't know if it's the 7th, the 8th, or the 9th, since the baby was born, it's not even Docha Yantif. Is Kisui, in the case of Kisui, Vadai ain't Docha Yantif. Even if it's a definite obligation, because Shechita definitely generates a chiyuv of Kisi Adam, nevertheless, we will not override the Shabbos. Is Eno Din Shein Sfeiko Docha Yantiv? Notice the laws of being Docha and overriding Shabbos apply to Yantiv as well. That's why in the case of Suffolk and Mila Shmini, we don't override the Shabbos, and we postpone the Mila till after Shabbos, and the same thing applies on Yantiv. So a suffix is not going to override Yantiv. Now, in a case of Kisi Adam, even if it would be Vadai that he's chayiv in Kisi Adam, we don't override the Yantiv. So how is it possible that Rav Eina could say that we're going to override the Shabbos for the sake of Kisi Adam. So the conclusion of this whole Kal V'chomer is Rabbi Yossi's conclusion that in the case of Koi, we have a suffix whether you chayiv in Kisi Adam, and therefore if you went ahead and you shechted a Koi on Yontif, you're not allowed to be Mechasa the Dam. Just like we said, we're not going to override the Shabbos and not even the Yontif for a suffix Mila of Shmini. And we said that Kisui, even when it's a Vadai, does not override the Shabbos. So certainly in the case of Suffolk, it would not override the Shabbos, and in the case of Yontif, it would not override the Yontif. Amru lo. So now at this point, the Bryce is going to sort of challenge Rav Yossi's Kal V'chomer. Tkiya shofar b'gvulin tochia. Right, there are two mitzvahs of Tkiya shofar in Rosh Hashanah. One is in the Migdash, there was a special mitzvah of Tkiya shofar, Lifnei Hashem. And outside the Beis HaMikdash, there is a regular mitzvah on Yontif on Rosh Hashanah of Tkiya shofar. She'ein v'ador docha Shabbos. If, let's say, you have a definite obligation to blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, yet you would not override the Shabbos outside of the Mikdash, and this is based on a Gemara Rosh Hashanah Chav Tes, that when Rosh Hashanah overlaps with Shabbos, then only in the Mikdash do we blow the shofar, but not outside the Mikdash. In the Mikdash, we have a rule of Ein Shvus b'Mikdash, but outside the Mikdash, in the boundaries, what's called the Gvulin, we don't blow the shofar. And this is called Gzera de Rabbah because we're afraid that if we blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah Shechal Yos b'Shabbos, maybe he'll take the shofar to an expert to learn how to blow the shofar, and he'll carry it from one Rishus to another, from Rishus HaYachid out into Rishus HaRabim, or Daled Amos Rishus HaRabim, and so forth and so on. So Gzera de Rabbah, that when Rosh Hashanah falls out on Shabbos, we don't blow the shofar, even though he has a Varechi of shofar. Usfeka doche yontif. Now, what's the case of Sfeka? So again, if Rosh Hashanah does not fall on Shabbos, then it's on Yontif. I mean, Rosh Hashanah is Yontif. So what does it mean, Sfeka doche Yontif? I think he's referring, just 1 second, to Tumtum and Androgynous. Right, a woman is exempt from the mitzvah of shofar because it's mitzvah sheisman groma. Tumtum and androgynous are two categories of individuals that are suffix ish, suffix isha, and we will blow the shofar for this suffix. But that's only if it's on a weekday. If Rosh Hashanah falls on a weekday. Now, the Gemara is now objecting to Rabbi Yossi and say, let's apply the same standards to Kisi Adam. And even though we came to the conclusion, as Rabbi Yossi assumes in his, unquestionably in his Kal V'chomer, that even a definite obligation for Kisei Adam doesn't override the Shabbos, because again, why should Kisei Adam override the Shabbos? Then therefore, maybe we should come to the conclusion that just like a Vadai in Shofar does not override the Shabbos, and yet a suffix would in Tekiah Shofar would in Androgus override the Yontiv, is therefore, even though a Shabbos for Kisei Adam would not override the Shabbos, but maybe in the case of a Yontiv, even a questionable obligation, even a suffix, would override the Yontiv. And that's against the Kavachomer of Rabbi Yossi. So again, we see over and over again, there's a pattern here that the Rabbanan are being makil on Yontif. Like, for example, in the case of definite Tkiyah Shofar, when Rosh Hashanah falls out on Shabbos, we are machmir, but we're going to be more lenient on Yontif. We're going to override Yontif with a Tkiyah Shofar, even in the case of suffix. So if we're following that logic, then when we ask the question about Kisei Adam of a Kai on Yontif, we might say that for the benefit of the suffix, that maybe the Kai is a Chaya, we should override Yontif. Even though clearly we would not override the Shabbos for the sake of Kisei Adam. Heishi Rabbi Elazar Kappa Beribi Tshuva Mala Mila. Like Rabbi Yossi based his entire logic on Mila, Shekain Eina Noheges Belele Yomim Tovim. Right, there's no Mila at night. There's only Mila during the day. Because it says Biyom Hashmini Yom Velo Laila. So now we have the 8th day on Yontiv, but Mila is not going to apply at night because Mila never applies at night. Is Tomer Bekisui Shenoig Belela Yomim Tovim. Why you bring me a raya from Mila? Maybe you're right. And I'm not going to argue with you that Mila, in a case of suffix, because you don't know whether this is the 8th day since the baby was born or not, then it would not override Yontif. That I understand. Because the Torah was very lenient and laid back with regard to Mila. There's no Mila at night on Yontif, or on any night. But in Kisui, we have Kisei Adam, whether it's day or night, there's no difference. You have to cover the blood. So maybe on Yontif, maybe on Kisui, because the mitzvah of Kisui applies even at night, we should be more machmir. And maybe it could override Yontif. Rabbi Abba, Ze Echad Min HaDvarim Sha'omer Rabbi Chia, Ein Aleim Tshuva. Rabbi Yossi's Kavachomer is one of the things about which Rabbi Chia said, I have no refutation, no way of refuting Rabbi Yossi. Ve'heshiv Rabbi Elazar Kappa Beribi Tshuva. But yet we just established that Rabbi Elazar Kappa could refute the Kavachomer of Yossi. Okay, now let's get back to Rav Ina, right? What was his name? Rav Ina? Rav Ina, the Seir. And he said that when you violate the Shabbos with a shechita to save the life of a dangerously ill person, then you go ahead and you do the Kisei Adam. Toni Mios. The Brisa, however, says that Kisui she'ein vadai. Docha Shabbos, even if you know for sure without any doubt, it's not a koi, it's a chaya, and yet you shechter the chaya, it doesn't. You don't do kisi adam to override the Shabbos. My vadi the kisui de lo dochi Shabbos. What's his case? I mean, when you're talking about shchita with an obligation of kisui, how do you have an obligation of kisui and a shchita on Shabbos? It's one of the malachos. Love hashokei l'chol Shabbos. In other words, we have a case of a vadai shchita and a vadai kisui adam, and yet it doesn't override the Shabbos. So how could Rav Avira say that you do kisui adam on Shabbos? And the Gemara answers, wait a minute, v'dilma di ovar v'shochat. Maybe we're going to say that if he violated the Shabbos and there was no heta, there was no dangerously ill person, but rather the person was healthy and he went ahead and he shechted. In those situations, we're not going to allow him to do kisi adam. It's bad enough that he violated the Shabbos with shchita, but in the case of a chola, where you're allowed to shecht an animal to save the life of a dangerously ill person, then maybe we could be mekil, as Rav Avias pointed out, and we could allow the kisi adam. Mar says, no, dumya de mila. Let's compare the case of kisi adam to the case of mila. Ma mila bershus. Af kisi nami bershus. Meaning, since the Brisa brings down these cases together, that means that the case of Mila was that he was allowed to do the Mila on Shabbos. Why? It was the 8th day. So therefore, Kisui Nami Bershus, meaning that there was a chola, and it was permissible to do the Shechita for the sake of saving the life of a dangerously ill person. So the Shechita was mutter for the sake of a chola. And yet the Brisa says that Kisui Adam is asur, so we see that Rav Eina made a mistake. Amrulo. Again, we go back to the Brisa that presented an objection to Rabbi Yossi's Kal Vachomer. Tkiya shof b'gvulin tochiach. I'm going to upslug your Kal Vachomer because of Tkiya shof b'gvulin. So we're talking about the regular mitzvah of shofar on Yontif of Rosh Hashanah. Shein v'ada docha Shabbos. Even in a case where he has a definite obligation to blow the shofar when Rosh Hashanah fell out on a Shabbos, and that's the Xavier the Rabbah that we spoke about earlier, Usveika docha Yontif. And in the case of a suffix isha, we don't know he's chayiv in Tkiyah shofar. Nevertheless, we're going to override the Yontif and blow the shofar. So we see that we're more mekel on Yontif than we are on Shabbos. My Sveika, what is this case of a suffix that overrides Yontif? Ilem a suffix chol suffix Yontif. If it's Yontif shein shel golios, we don't know if it's Yontif or it's chol because of the whole institution of Kiddush al pi re'iyah. And then I'll say that doesn't prove anything about Kisi Adam. Hashta vada Yontif dachya. Right, with regard to shofar, we say that if he's definitely chayav in shofar and it's definitely Yontif, is dachya. Dachya means we blow the shofar on Yontif. Safek Yontif, Safek chol mi boy. When it might be chol and there's no violation at all, then for sure it should be permissible to blow the shofar. He says when the Torah decrees that the shofar be blown when it is definitely Rosh Hashanah, it is obvious that no yontif restriction can stand in its way. Clearly, it must be blown out of doubt on the day that is observed Rosh Hashanah out of doubt, like the Sveika Diyoma, despite the possible yontif restrictions that apply in that day. So how could this be quoted as a proof that a questionable obligation of Kisi Adam would override a definite yontif day, where the restriction is definite and the obligation is questionable? And the Gemara answers, Ella, Safek Ish, Safek Isha. All right, so tomorrow we decided that we're going to have to skip it unless you're available at 10:30 at night or something like that. And then after pay, hey, we have Shabbos. So that's going to be Pei Vav. And then Sunday we have Pei Zayin. All right, we'll have to work this all out.
I mean, do you want to do 10:30 tomorrow night or
I would like to try it. If
okay, that
you're
should be okay with me.
okay, great. We have to do Kiddush Levana and eat a meal to break fast.
Right.
Okay then.
All
So I
right.
wish you a meaningful Tisha B'Av, and thank you very much. Kol Tov.